we're going to talk today. This is all sorts of rumors swirling around about what the vice presidential pick is going to be. I think it's pretty clear it's come down now to Governor Mike Pence, an old friend of mine in Indiana, or myself. I'm very flattered to be in that group, and I've spent 2.5 hours yesterday with Donald Trump and his team talking about ideas and talking about how the vice presidency might work. But I thought that you might find interesting to think about what it's like to go through the vetting process. I was approached a couple of months ago, and they said, would Callista and I be willing to consider serving as vice president? And it's a great honor, and I felt like we should make ourselves available. I'm a very strong supporter of Donald Trump and believe that defeating Hillary Clinton is vital to our country's survival, because I think she would be the most corrupt person ever to be put in the White House. So I'm deeply committed in the campaign, and I said I'll be helpful any way I can be. Then comes a request, and A.B. Culverhouse, who has done this many times, a very important lawyer in Washington, called and said he'd been asked to vet me. Now, the vetting process is interesting, and he had a very, I think, practical explanation. He said, you know, if you run for president, the American people vet you, the news media vets you. But if you're picked to be vice president, you're not in a primary, you're not out in the open, you're not being investigated by the reporters. And so there's a much more rigorous process, actually, to be vetted for vice president than there is to be vetted for president. Now, I pointed out to him that having first run for office in 1974, having run for president in 2012, have been speaker for 4 years, probably if he just Googled my name, he'd have more material than he needed. And he laughed and said, yeah, but they have a process. So over the years, this process has evolved into 113 questions. It's really quite amazing. One of them was, would I list everything I had written? And I called AB and I said, wait, this is a deal breaker. If I assigned an intern, it would take a year between articles, news columns, op-eds, books, speeches I've given to list everything. He said, no. He said, apply the rule of reason. So we took the 27 books and the 9 movies and things like that and put them together into a package. And they wanted all my taxes back to 2004. That was a mound, and just a stack of tax material. So there were a whole series, 113 of these kind of questions. And Bess Kelly, who is our chief operating officer at Gingrich Productions, did just an astonishing job. She took on the whole project of gathering all the stuff, pulling it together. I also got them a copy of the manuscript of a brand new book that Craig Shirley, who is the great student and historian of the Reagan campaigns, and has written a brilliant book called 1941. Shirley has a new book coming out called Citizen Newt, and had, I think it's like 600 pages of material. So I got that. Shirley gave me an early text so that I could share it with them. So they had all the research that Craig had done, and he's a very, very thorough researcher. So you go through this process first at that level. Then when they've submitted all this material, we had AB and 3 other lawyers come over, and they spent about 3 hours with Callista and me, and with Beth sitting in because she'd pulled it all together, and asked a whole bunch of questions, trying to figure out, is there anything in your background which would blow up in the news media? Some of this goes back to the famous 1972 McGovern campaign, where it turned out that his vice presidential nominee had electric shock treatments. And at that time, that was considered really strange and unusual. And Eagleton was his name. And Senator Eagleton had to drop off the ticket. And so that was sort of the beginning of the vetting process of what is it we should know about you that might be embarrassing or difficult. And then secondly, if you have 3 or 4 really good candidates, the people who do the vetting are able to sort of point out, well, here are the strengths, here are the weaknesses, here are the complexities. So it's a very, very serious, very elaborate process. In that process then, we talked at length with several people in the Trump senior organization. And then yesterday I met for 2.5 hours with Donald Trump and his team. and we talked about it. So as you can see, what Mike Pence would have gone through up to now is a very substantial process of trying to sort out where we are and what we're doing and what we should be concerned about. So Kelly McGowan said, what is the most impressive thing to you about Donald Trump? I think it's his courage. He had the courage to go from Queens as a sort of small-time realtor, real estate guy, to jump into Manhattan, the most challenging real estate market in the world. He had the courage to take on a TV show when he'd never done one and turn it into a #1 TV show in The Apprentice. He's had the courage again and again to develop new projects, new approaches, and he's had the courage to run for President of the United States and speak his mind and be who he is, with strengths and weaknesses, and done it in a way that I think is very impressive, and apparently many Americans think is very impressive because he got more votes than any Republican in history. So I would say the #1 thing I'm impressed about with Donald Trump is courage. Ken Hissung writes, if you were the presidential nominee, what would your qualifications be for a vice presidential running mate? It's a great question. I really think there are 3 key tests that any potential vice president has to meet. The first is, could they be president? Remember, this is a serious standby job, and we've had 7 vice presidents become president. So you've got to start with the idea that, you're picking somebody here, you better be sure they meet the ability to lead the country, to keep us safe, to handle really difficult problems. The second thing I think you have to ask is, do they at least not hurt the campaign? They don't have to help the campaign a whole lot. The candidate's got to win the election. In this case, Donald Trump has to win the election. But it helps if the vice president's candidate doesn't hurt you. So that's a consideration. Third, and I think in many ways, once you've decided that the candidate's capable of being president, the most important question is chemistry. If you go back and look at Bill Clinton picking Al Gore, traditional politicians would have said it made no sense. Al Gore was from the neighboring state, Arkansas and Tennessee. That doesn't give you any kind of geographic diversity. But what it did do is it gave Clinton somebody about his own age with whom he could be very comfortable. So there were some very famous pictures early on of them on a bus tour, throwing the football and being relaxed, being younger. And you just had the sense that Clinton gained strength from having Gore there, a kind of a unique interpersonal chemistry. George W. Bush knew that he had great weakness in national security, which of course turned out to be the dominant issue of his administration. And so he picked somebody who had been the Secretary of Defense, as well as being a senior Republican in the House. And Dick Cheney fit because he created a sense of security that enabled people to imagine this Texas governor as President of the United States. And in that sense, the role that he played was very, very important. I think that Joe Biden has been very helpful to Barack Obama. He's had years of experience in the Senate. He has a very wide range of personal friends, people who like him even if they're conservative Republicans. And as a result, he's been able to get things done for Obama that Obama couldn't get done for himself. So again, I think you look for that. And I think Donald Trump has to look for, what's he looking for? What's the chemistry he needs? What does he think will strengthen him, not just in the campaign, but also in governing? Stephen says, is it more important to balance the ticket between vice president and president, or double down on the presidential candidate, as Clinton did by picking Gore in 1992? Actually, I don't think that Clinton was doubling down. I think he was looking for an emotional buddy, as I just said a minute ago. I think every election's different, and we'll find out, what Donald Trump decides to do. I told him quite directly that I thought that he had a choice between having 2 pirates on the ticket or having a pirate and a relatively stable, more normal person, and that's a question of what do you think you need, in reaching out to the party regulars who are still not happy with Trump, and what do you need in reassuring the country, and whether I could do that better or Mike Pence could do that better. That's something Trump has to personally sort through as he sees it from his perspective. And I had great respect for the way we talked it through. I also think that the process of defining what kind of campaign you want to run, what kind of issues you want to develop, how you want people to feel about you going in, is a very important part of this. In 1960, when John F. Kennedy picked Lyndon Johnson, which was a big surprise to people, Johnson had been his primary competitor for the nomination. Johnson was older than Kennedy, more senior, had been the Senate Majority Leader. But Johnson also was the key to holding the South. And Kennedy knew that as the first, the second after Al Smith, Catholic nominee, but the first Catholic nominee to have a real chance to win, that in the South there would be considerable suspicion. And he knew that with a Massachusetts accent and a Harvard degree and all those things, that he needed an ambassador who could speak Southern. And so they weren't, I think, compatible in terms of their personal chemistry. But boy, were they compatible as a ticket in putting together a victory. And I think that's a good example of another way of thinking about the vice presidency. Somebody called in or wrote in, what do you make of the supposed importance of choosing a vice president from a swing state? Well, I think sometimes it can be very helpful. I think sometimes it can actually carry a state. It's not always true. And certainly under some circumstances, you would like to have somebody who can carry a swing state. I think my appeal is probably more national. I have some appeal in virtually every state. I think that Mike Pence would have a huge Midwestern appeal. So if you're trying to compete for Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Missouri, Illinois, there's a certain value to an Indiana candidate, I think. In the past, we've seen other people who have been picked for a variety of reasons. Obviously, since he's from Delaware, Joe Biden was not picked to help carry a key swing state. And since Dick Cheney is from Wyoming, similarly, he was not picked for that purpose. But I do think there have been times that that's been done. The other way to think of it is pulling together the party. George H.W. Bush got to be vice president for Ronald Reagan because Reagan knew that as a hardline conservative, he needed somebody who represented the moderate establishment wing to bring everyone together. And it turned out to work. When the minute he announced George H.W. Bush, all of the moderates and all of the regular Republicans fell in line because they saw they had somebody on the ticket they could identify with. Sahil Kapoor, what do you think Chris Christie and Mike Pence bring to the table if they're chosen as Trump's running mate? Well, they bring very different things. Chris Christie is a terrific prosecutor. He, as he showed when he took on Marco Rubio in that one debate in New Hampshire, he has this unique ability to reach out and to define the kind of case. Again, a guy who's gone before jury trials, a guy who understands how do you appeal to the jury, how do you make the case. So in a sense, if what you want is a person who can take on Hillary Clinton, you'd certainly say that Chris Christie is significant in that sense. I would say that Mike Pence brings a different set of qualities to that. Mike Pence brings the qualities of having governed very successfully in Indiana, having cut spending, having cut taxes, having done things that increased economic growth and brought more jobs to the state. So they're very different qualities, and it would depend on what you're trying to accomplish, which one you'd want to be on the ticket if you were the nominee. Stephen Chrétien says, how do the vice president debates differ in substance from the presidential debates? Well, of course, there's usually only one of them in the course of an election. And if anything happens in them, they're usually not policy debates. There's usually something personal that happens. The best case might be the 1988 debate between Senator Lloyd Bentsen and Senator Dan Quayle. Bentsen was the Democratic vice presidential nominee under Dukakis. Quayle was the Republican vice presidential nominee under George H.W. Bush. Both of them served in the Senate, knew each other well. And there was, and Quayle, as a younger guy, was trying to identify with John F. Kennedy. And there was a key moment where Lloyd Bentsen said, I knew John F. Kennedy, and you are no John F. Kennedy. And you could just see that Quayle was stunned by it, and that for a minute there he didn't know what to answer. Now, what's doubly interesting about this is that while it hurt Quayle, and there's no question that it hurt him in public opinion, Quayle had spent the whole debate attacking Dukakis. Benson had spent the whole debate attacking Quayle. So even though the best hit of the debate was Lloyd Benson's line, Benson lost the debate because Dukakis came down in popular support because Quayle was pounding away at the principle, and instead of taking on George H.W. Bush, Benson was taking on Quayle. But people didn't primarily think about Quayle when they voted, they thought about Bush. So it's an ironic case where the best single line went to the loser, but if you looked at the data, the loser was Lloyd Benson and the Democrats in that particular debate. It's just a fascinating side story about all of this. So there are a lot of interesting pieces that go into this. I think tomorrow I'm going to spend some time after the Trump announcement. I think whether I'm the person he announces or we have Mike Pence being announced, I'm going to do a Facebook Live, and I promise you if I am the nominee, I'll be a nominee with Facebook Live, and you'll have lots of opportunities. And if Mike's the nominee, I'm going to try to get him to do a lot of Facebook Live, because this is a great way for us to be able to talk with each other. And as you know, tomorrow I'll also have my newsletter coming out at GingrichProductions.com that you can sign up for if you'd like to get our free twice-a-week newsletter. So I hope this has been helpful, give you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes feel for the vice presidential selection process. And like you, I'm looking forward to the next 24 hours.